Welcome to the Intentional Parents Podcast Season 2. Intentional exists to help parents in their God-given task to raise passionate Jesus followers. We exist to bring hope, help, and healing to families. Each week, we will talk about anything from parenting, marriage, lifestyle, and what it looks like to follow Jesus in our time. Intentional is made up of Phil and Diane Comer and Brook and Elizabeth Moser. I am Brook, and the funny thing is, we are all family. Elizabeth is Phil and Diane's daughter, so we're a family figuring this thing out together. We hope this podcast feels like you're sitting with us in our home talking about how to do this thing called life together. Elizabeth and I are your hosts. Let's get into this week's podcast. All right, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, intentional parents, wherever you are at. Brook here today. We have just a special episode, and it's just me. Elizabeth is not going to be with me today hosting this podcast, and Phil and Diane are not on this podcast, but we do have a really special guest, and I've been looking forward to this for a long time, honestly. And we have John Mark Comer on the podcast today. John Mark, welcome, and we are so glad to have you.
Thank you, buddy. It's nice to be with you, although you're actually sitting in my chair in my office, so I think maybe I'm the one who should say welcome. Yeah. Welcome, Intentional Parenting International, to my office. Here we are, the global headquarters of Intentional.
It feels condescending when you say it that way.
No, I don't mean it that way.
No, I know you don't.
I always say that I have this little podcast too, and we're like the world headquarters of this cultural moment, also known as the basement at an old church.
Well, I was going to say, this is actually a good moment. To give people a heads up, you're a pastor in Portland.
This is true.
And church is called Bridgetown Church.
Brother-in-law first, pastor second. Though.
Yes. You are my brother-in-law, which I'm going to get to. But you're a pastor. You've been writing books for how many years now have you been writing books?
I don't know. A while. This was number 5. I just had number 5 come out.
Number 5.
About 2 years between each book, so somewhere around a decade.
Wow. So you've been writing books, and then you have this little podcast that just has been revolutionizing, I know, my mind and many others, this cultural moment, which...
The world headquarters are not far from here at all.
Yeah. And it's in the church basement, which you were saying.
Also known as downstairs in the church basement.
Yes, which I love. And I've been in that basement before, and it's gross. I mean, it's by far, like, when you talk about humble beginnings, like, that is a perfect place for
it's humble beginnings and humble endings, too.
I don't know. There's been some pretty cool stuff coming out of that pretty gross place. But, yeah, man, so happy to have you. And cool part about this, obviously, in your name, you are Phil and Diane's son, the firstborn. I'm sure you're probably thinking...
First is most important,
as
best. Everybody knows. First is best.
First is best, and I'm sure you would...
First of 4. Elizabeth is number 3.
We got Rebecca in there, and then Matthew, the youngest one. But, man, I felt this has been one of those interviews that I've been looking forward to, not only because we're family, but because I've seen and we've seen just the impact of God's call in your life on culture. And we've been just really excited to watch that, but also get to be a part of it. So a couple of things I just want to kind of maybe go back to. We're going to get into what it was like for Phil and Diane to be your parents specifically, and we're going to get into the book. But before we do, you and I have a history, which is great. And I think the first time we met, I was 17. I remember I was 17. I just started dating your little sister. And I think you had just gotten married to Tam. You were just married, like, as in, like, maybe a year. Wow. Of Tam, like, and how long have you and Tam?
This would have been a long time ago.
Yeah, well, how long have you and Tammy been married now?
We married in 2001, so we're 18 years in.
Shoot. Yeah, it's about that long since we met. When you do the math, that's a long. Yeah, we've known each other for about that long. So, so we met at 17, and we had this common interest of music, and we started playing music. And for some don't know, like, you're obviously. You're actually a songwriter, a really good one. And
ex-songwriter. Ex-mediocre
I still think you have some hits in you that Chris Tomlin would buy in a minute. I don't know if that's the metric. Yeah, I don't know if Chris Tomlin is the metric of success, but I just mean I think you got some more in you. But songwriter, and we started playing music together. We started hanging out, and I remember your mom and dad were starting this church, and you had this idea of like, hey, let's get some guys together on a Friday night and let's just have a Bible study.
Yeah.
And it was it was downtown Portland. We were getting together, and
it was like 6 of us or something.
It was just about 6 of us. And I remember the one Sunday morning, I don't know if you'll remember this, but I remember it vividly. We went out to coffee on Sunday morning, and you had said, hey, you know, I've been praying and thinking about like changing this guys group to kind of maybe like a college or young adults thing. And I have this idea of potentially inviting like some girls to it too, and kind of, you know, just opening it up to everybody. And I remember saying, oh, that's a terrible idea. This is going great with just the guys. It's just a bros thing. And I'm so glad you basically were like nicely like, no, we should open it up to everybody, because it became this incredible move of God, this college ministry called The Way.
Which is Portland, where our church was planted out of, which later became what is now Bridgetown Church. So yeah, it's funny. Like Bridgetown Church goes back to The Way, which goes back to Michael Watson's apartment right by PSU downtown. Right by PSU. And 6 of us. And
I remember, there was all these different moments where I remember one weekend you said, hey, you should teach the Bible study. Like, could you teach like through Timothy? I'd never taught about like anything like that. And I was like, oh, sure. Like I think I just pretended. Yeah, I got this. So I went and tried to study and come up with an idea out of 1st and 2nd Timothy or something. It was disastrous, I'm sure. But man, it's been a long time. And not only that, it's been great to just be your friend and get to watch what God's been doing, and also family. And
because I remember, you know, before I think we were friends. Weren't we friends before you were dating my sister, or was when you guys broke up?
Yeah,
that's what it was. So you were dating, and that's how I met you, right?
Yep.
And then you broke up, and then we were friends.
So I stayed. See, what happened was it wasn't on purpose,
and
but
then I wanted you to be my brother-in-law, and so I'm like, get your crap together and marry my sister so we can be related, so I can always have a good drummer for the band in the family.
I think it was Christmas morning. It was like the Christmas morning idea.
Yes, I wanted to be with you on Christmas morning.
Yeah, and there was only one way that was going to happen.
And here we are. And you were just drawn to me because, so for those of you that are listening online, you should know my sister and I look fairly similar. I mean, she's the beautiful. So I just keep thinking of this bizarre story. Brooke, do you remember this? A couple of years ago when like the Face app first came out, like not a couple months ago when like the big Russian thing and everybody was doing it. It actually came out years ago.
Yeah, a couple years ago, I remember.
And I remember I downloaded it because I think you had started on like the family text chain, and we were all laughing because like Hitman, like it gives you the 4 different pictures of yourself. One's like Hitman where you look like it shaves your head and gives you stubble, and you look like yourself.
That's basically
you looked exactly like what you look like. But then it gives you one of the opposite gender. So it was like me old, me bald, me as a hitman, and then me as a woman. And I remember distinctly, I sent it out on the family text chain, and you were so confused. You're like, why is a picture of Elizabeth on there?
I have to tell you, man, that was so
apparently I make a beautiful...
Yeah, well, your sister is beautiful, but I remember I would tease you or whatever and be like, oh, she's so beautiful, and you'd be like, yeah, we have the same eyes. And I was like never able to like look at you in the eyes ever again. I was like, I can't.
This is just Big Brother stuff.
Yeah, it was really good.
Yeah, way back,
and we worked together for a handful of years.
Yeah,
and man, I just want to say, have the utmost respect for what God's doing in your life. I've told you this, not just on a podcast, obviously offline, but one of my favorite things is just some of our talks. You know, I think even this last summer, we were on a run and we just started talking, and man, I just have so appreciated our talks and just how I love how God's given you and how you've ran after. I don't even think it's just God given. I think you've actually run after seeking Him and discovering. And I think it's been a real blessing. It's been a big fruit for the ministry that you have, but also for those that are close to you. And even now with books, those who are not close to you, I think we see the fruit of your hard work and your labor in that space. And so, I just love our talks. And so my hope was that we could kind of capture one of our talks, one of our, when we get done with a 4 or 5 mile run and we're both dying, because do you remember the last thing, and we'll move on to some questions, but do you remember, I don't know if this was actually at like an actual church service, but we made a covenant to each other or with each other once to never let each other, like basically that we committed to never let ourselves go.
Oh my gosh, don't say that on the internet.
No, I just remember we made like edit. Yeah. we'll move on from that. But
don't hold me accountable to that, man.
No, I'm just holding you accountable to exercise. So we still have this thing where we'll be like, yeah, we got to go on a run because we just have to take care of ourselves.
Yeah, and you're like that person that always wants to talk about the latest fitness routine. And I'm like, bro, I don't want to talk about calories and like squats.
Like, let's go. Yeah. Well, body, we're mind, body, all that stuff. So, but you just wrote a book, and I've been reading it, been blessed by it. Elizabeth and I both have been, and I don't want to talk about it. And the book is
awesome.
Called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. And man, been such an incredible read. I know that I'm not the only one that's read it that has been really blessed by it. And there's a handful of questions and things I think that I would love to just get us starting to talk into, especially for the moms and the dads that are going to be listening today. But before we even ask a couple questions, one thing I want to kind of get from your perspective, we're listening. A lot of people that are listening in listen to your parents talk about intentional parenting, and they talk about this idea of being thoughtful with how you're raising your kids and wanting them to not just be good people for sure, but to like actually raise your kids to be people that love Jesus with all of their heart, mind, soul, and strength, like all of them. And so I kind of wanted to ask you, especially while they're not in the room, although they're going to hear all this, is, man, what was it like for you, the oldest, the firstborn, growing up with having parents that were wanting to be really intentional about this? What were some of the things that you remember, or some of the good, maybe some of the not so good, some of the things you remember that were a part of being intentionally raised?
Yeah, I mean, I think I had a really happy childhood, so I don't have some like crazy, I was well loved, and I think my parents, Dad always says, ministry is about modeling, and that's true. It really is. Paul says the same thing: follow me as I follow Christ, or follow Jesus the way that I follow Jesus. And I think my parents modeled the things they teach. In particular, there was a basic kind of core set of practices that they were committed to over years and decades, over the long haul, of morning scripture and prayer, of church on Sunday, of family dinners together, of family devotions, of family playing together, of discipline, of and I think they had like a core repertoire of like, these are the practices. This is kind of how we parent. And I think that really built a foundation over years and years and years of fidelity, Yeah. And a lot of that stuff is just in my muscle memory now, whether it be morning scripture reading and prayer, or church on Sunday. I mean, I remember we'd go to, when we were on vacation, we'd like go visit churches. And this is back in the 80s and 90s. They'd give you like a guest packet and, pre-digital age, all this stuff. And nobody does that anymore. But that was just so, I remember getting my allowance from my dad on Saturday nights and getting a couple bucks, and you pull out the dimes to count out your tithe.
Yeah.
And, I think just some of these core from their church tradition practices of what it means to follow Jesus were just right at the center of our home. We just really grew up around it, grew up around the scriptures, grew up around prayer, grew up around church, grew up around parents that were the same on stage and off stage. And I think that integrity really matters, especially when you have parents who are in leadership. I remember when we were pregnant, we being my lovely wife, T, I was not pregnant, but when Jude was in the womb, I actually had this weird like nervousness around having my first child as a pastor, because you hear all this like terrible stuff around pastors' kids, and PKs have this really lousy reputation, and that always struck me as bizarre. I thought, like, if anything, like the stats should be that pastors' children are more likely to do well, or at least follow Jesus, and so that never really made sense to me. So when Tammy was pregnant, I went around asking a bunch of like older, wiser leaders that I respected, hey, why is that? And how do I avoid it? And it's really interesting. I thought they would say a number of things. I thought they would say it's the hours on the job, it's a lot of work. I thought they would say it's the stress on the family, or it's the being in the limelight, or whatever it is. And none of them said that. They all said they all gave the exact same answer. And it was hypocrisy. Mom and dad are a different person on stage than they are off. And that's not to say if any, person's in leadership at a church and their kids are not thriving, they're a hypocrite. It doesn't you can't reverse engineer it that way. But I think that was something that in that moment hit me like, oh, wow, I'm really grateful for my, my parents have flaws, but they will tell you what they are.
Yeah.
So they're not hidden flaws. Any of the flaws of my parents, you could pick up by just listening to them and hanging out with them. They're not like, there's not dirt on them. What you see is what you get.
Yes.
And there is something beautiful to that.
Yeah. The transparency. And how do you feel, the question, I didn't prep you for this. So if you have no response, that's okay. But that idea of your parents being thoughtful and intentional and loving you. And I think you said some of that's in your muscle memory.
Yeah.
What do you think that, or I mean, if you can even kind of gauge the impact, right? How do you think that's affected your trajectory? How do you think that's affected you stepping into the world, your calling, all of that? I mean, how do you feel? Do you feel like that's played in? I mean, in some ways we could obviously say yes, but like, to what level do you kind of think that that's been a gift to you?
Oh yeah, I mean, so many levels. I mean, pick your area, work, relationships, socioeconomic, spiritual. I mean, yeah, it built a foundation for me to jump off into life for. Not that I have not had to learn a lot of lessons the hard way and all of that. And not that it gave me everything I could ever want or need. But yeah, I mean, definitely it laid down a foundation for me to go off of. And I watch, in particular, as we're now, people I think don't quite realize family's always been messy and hard and difficult, but we're at an acute societal moment of relational breakdown, social breakdown, emotional breakdown, spiritual breakdown, and a lot of it's multifaceted. A lot of it stems, goes back to Woodstock and the sexual revolution. Mm-hmm. And now we have, which then created an entire generation of divorce, which then created an entire generation of, my age and younger that grew up as the byproduct. We now are the first adult generation that's the byproduct of widespread divorce. And what that does, as you see in other more impoverished communities where there's a lot of single parenting, a lot of single mothers, less fathers in the home, it has disastrous effect on the socioeconomics, on the emotional health, it doesn't lay the same foundation that a stable two-parent household does. It doesn't mean that God can't do beautiful things for single parents. He does on a regular basis. But there's just a gift, and when you have a healthy marriage and a healthy, not perfect, doesn't exist, but a healthy family. So yeah, we're just now seeing the fallout of all of that breakdown on a generation, the levels of anxiety and emotional unhealth. And of course, it's very multifaceted. There's multiple things, the phone and secularism and, all sorts of things. But for sure, I think family is one of the main ones, if not the main one. So yeah, I just feel immensely grateful that my dad taught me things. I think we were chatting to Matthew recently, or my little brother, who's in a new job and he's crushing it. He's like doing really well at it. And I'm like, man, what do you think? Like, how are you doing so good? And he laughed and he's like, it is like basic things. Like he's like, just all the stuff dad taught us. He's like, show it for work on time. Say yes, sir. Look people in the eye. Shake people's hands. Answer phone calls. It's like it's
becoming this novel thing.
And he's
days.
Like, it's just the basic stuff that dad taught us. But he's like, most of my friends haven't been taught this stuff yet. So they're having to learn the hard way as 20-somethings on the job from a boss rather than, I mean, it's all the stuff that I'm teaching my 13-year-old boy. Hey, don't say that. Hey, we don't say that word. Hey, look the person in the eye. Hey, that was kind of rude when you interrupted. It's like all that stuff.
That's massive.
That if mom or dad doesn't teach you, the boss will teach you often, I don't think pink slips are a thing anymore.
Yeah, no.
Whatever.
I think, and the reason I asked that question, thank you for answering that. I think it's just, that gives so many hope. I know even as a person who is wanting to be an intentional, thoughtful dad, it gives, I think, a ton of hope to recognize like those moments in the mundanity, which we're going to get to. I think you talked about the boring mundanity of the middle years. When you're in the stage when it's just like, it's just parent. Monotonous.
I say 8,000 times, don't talk with your mouth full of food. Like how many times?
Exactly. Like that it actually matters, that it's actually changing the trajectory of that little human, even though they're not, it's those little deposits, 1% change every day, over the course of
0.01% change.
That's probably what it is.
And I mean, and the gift of that. I always joke with Jude because we're pretty rigorous and committed to kind of a digital asceticism for our family as a whole, in particular for our children. So the kids know, and there's some flexibility. We could always reconsider this. Our oldest is 14 right now, but the standing rule of thumb is no phone till you're 16 and no smartphone or social media till you're 18. We don't have a TV in the house, so on and so forth. So some people think we're crazy, but I don't really care what other people think. I just want to raise good kids. But it's so funny. It's like, I always tell Jude, I'm like, bro, you are going to destroy it with all the girls when you're in college, because you're going to be the only one that actually knows how to make small talk anymore. Like, not on a text
or
message.
Eye contact.
Like eye contact, and like knows how to go up to a girl and be like, hey, what's your name? Let's hang out.
Gosh, she's going to be married in 5 minutes.
Seriously, nobody's like, if you look at Gen Z, which is wonderful. Gen Z, there's some wonderful things about Gen Z, but there's some terrifying things. They're way less cynical than millennials, than our generation. But there's some massive social, I don't know if handicap's too strong of a word, but social inhibitions and inabilities, you know, because of being raised around device, text messaging, social media, you know, which is why sexuality is like the number of teens having sex is way, 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 way down right now, which as a Christian, first you're like, oh, great, that sounds awesome. But it's not, because like purity culture is
and it's
back.
it's not just teenagers, it's in general.
It's in general.
Less people are having sex now than ever before.
They're saying part of it's because of pornography, which is way easier than sex. And the other part is because real sex with a real person actually requires the ability to seduce somebody, which requires the ability to talk to people IRL and like make small talk.
Goodness.
And and if you can't, you know, if you don't know how to actually interact with people on the fly, which text messaging and social media cut down on that muscle memory, that capacity to just make conversation. So it's a long way of saying, I always tell Jude, bro, you're going to hate me right now because you're not on Instagram and we don't have a TV, but you're going to love me when you're 22 and all the girls are like, Jude can talk so good.
Well, he's already a master with words, so I don't think even if you weren't his dad. But no, I really appreciate, I think what you just said, having a rule of life, which is something you talk about also.
For us.
That's a big deal. And digital
and
asceticism.
We have a digital rule of life for our family too, which, are you familiar with Andy Crouch's The Tech-Wise Family?
Yep. Well, we've actually talked about it really quick on this podcast, but it's a great plug again, and we'll put it in the show notes. But
beautiful.
That's a great book, and it's been really helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny, we're taking our church through this right now. He has like 12 rules, and they kind of read like rules. And a rule of life is not a list of rules. That's another conversation. But his list does read like a list of rules. So we just kind of adapted it. We stole a couple, like, you know, car time is conversation time, and a couple of those. Parent your phone, I think that's his language. But we just stole some of his and added a bunch of our own and kind of came up with this is our rule of life, you know? Yeah. No devices for kids in their rooms by themselves. No, you know, parent our phone, like no phones at the dinner table, a bunch of that kind of stuff.
Yes.
That for us is really key. Because I do think that somehow managing digital distraction and the content, the secular and often sexual content that comes through all the digital devices, is one of the main jobs that parents have right now in the digital age. And
I think this leads beautifully into the book that you just wrote, you know, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. And so I have some questions around that, but give us kind of like the, maybe just give us the quick snapshot of the conviction and the place where this came from for you, where this book was born out of for you.
Like kind of backstory, autobiography, backstory kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, you could tell that story as well as me. So we worked together on staff at a mega church that my dad and I and you and a number of people planted together 16, 17 years ago.
Yes.
And the church grew really fast by thousands of people, and like within a few years was a very large church. At one point, my dad and I kind of changed roles, and I was leading. I think we had 93 people on staff at some point. I
remember it was crazy.
Yeah, and I was like, 30 years old, had no business. I was nowhere close to mature enough at an emotional level, social level, to lead an organization of 100 people. I mean, I was not mature enough for that. And so, very long story short, I had a bit of a kind of early midlife crisis, you know, and some of it was like an emotional breakdown of just exhaustion, burnout, fatigue, anxiety, me learning the hard way. I don't want to be the pastor with 93 people on staff. Not because I have an issue with that. It's just not who I am. I'm not like leader of leaders. I'm an introvert. I want to like sit in my home office in this chair and read books, you know, and pray and you know, and teach and do spiritual direction. I have no desire. I'm not like an organizational leader. That's not my passion. So some of it was an emotional crisis, but then below it was a much deeper underlying spiritual crisis. And when I say spiritual, meaning not like a crisis of faith in God, but a crisis of spiritual formation. Yeah. Where, you know, I define spiritual life as our capacity to receive and give love in relationship with God and other people.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so people talk about
So
spiritual growth, and that's such sentimental language. I don't really even know what people mean by that, you know? So by that definition, it means year over year, you're growing in your capacity both to receive love from God and from other people, and then to give love back to God and back to other people, your friends, your family, your children, even your enemies, as you grow and mature towards Christ-likeness. And your capacity should go up year over year to give more and more love. And love defined as Jesus, not just like you're cool, you're nice, or you're chill, but like to will the good of another ahead of your own, no matter the cost to yourself, agape. And if love is the telos of the spiritual journey, as Jesus seemed to say that it was, that the most important commandments in all of the library of Scripture were to love God with all your heart, to love your neighbor as yourself. And his one-line summary of the Sermon on the Mount in Luke's version was, be compassionate as your Father is in heaven is compassionate. So if the whole telos of the spiritual journey, the whole point for us as parents of what the main job, the main thing we're attempting to cultivate and nurture our children into is love and increasing capacity to give and receive love to God and to others. Year over year, I was not only not becoming more loving, if anything, I was becoming less and less loving under the stress, anxiety, overload, hurry, exhaustion, workaholism, ambition, ego, strife, all of the stuff that came with it that was in my body and in my soul. I was, if anything, becoming less loving year over year, just due to emotional unhealth, if nothing else. And so it was really a crisis where, something happens when you hit around 30, where all of a sudden you have a decade or so of adult life under your belt, and it's enough to kind of chart a trajectory for who you're becoming, and 20-somethings don't think about this. They don't think about spiritual formation in the sense of I will becomes. Like I always tell people, spiritual formation is not a Christian thing, it's a human thing. Everybody's becoming somebody. And so, and I just use the analogy, and it could come off ageist, and I don't mean it that way. But if you run through your mental Rolodex of elderly people that and I would say 80 up, 80, 90, 95 years old, and you just think about, most of us, it's not a really long list. They tend to be, as a general rule, either the best people or the worst people
Oh man,
they're either so loving and joyful and selfless and happy to be in the same room as you and generous and relaxed that you just think, I don't think this person's sinned since 1987, or they are like
some of the hardest
2-year-olds in an 89-year-old's body, just manipulative, anger, vicious at times, cruel, ungrateful, unhappy, constant stream of complaining, verbal manipulation of family, demanding, and you're like, oh wow. And what that is, that's a really sobering reality. There's not a lot of 89-year-olds that are just kind of in the middle. Most 20-somethings are in the middle. It's rare to meet a really outstanding or really bad 29-year-old or 24-year-old.
They're kind of, they're still developing.
It's rare to meet a normal 89-year-old. Most of them are like saints or, and C.S. Lewis would say that everybody is on a path or a road or a way to heaven or to hell, to life or to death. Meaning just the way that you're living, you're becoming, you're embodying heaven in your own body or hell, however you want to define that. So all that to say, I think that I had a decade under my belt and I could realize, oh wow, I'm not becoming a person of love. If anything, the person I see down the road might make X, dollars or have whatever level of success by American metrics. But it is not a person who's loving and joyful and peaceful and in a healthy marriage and whose kids follow Jesus and love Jesus and want to be around dad as adults. And none of that was on my horizon. And so it was a real kind of crisis point. I need to radically change my life.
And one thing you say in the book, page 23, you say love is slow.
Yes.
Love is slow. And I underlined that
Are you referring to that Japanese theologian quote?
I think so. I underlined it 15 times. Love is not this quick thing.
Yes.
So, as you're saying, you weren't becoming that person of love. If anything, you were becoming less loving. Hurry, you were recognizing it, as you kind of say in the book, was part of this problem of,
and that's my basic pitch. So for those of you listening, I would define hurry just as, for those of you listening, what a stupid thing to say. If you're listening, if you're hearing this, you're listening.
If you're listening, you're listening.
To all of you, I would define hurry as too much to do. That's the most basic definition. So if you think of it synonym busyness, There's a healthy kind of busyness that just means like you have a couple kids and a job and you're giving your life away to something meaningful. Your life is generative. You're not just wasting it playing Call of Duty for hours every night or whatever.
Yep.
So there's a healthy kind of busyness. And by that definition, Jesus himself was very busy. But then there's an unhealthy or toxic, or what Ronald Rolheiser calls pathological busyness.
Yes.
Which is where you have too much to do. And I think a better word for that is hurry. And the essence of hurry is too much to do. It's where you have so much on your plate that the only way to attempt to cram it all in is to speed up your mind, your body, your relationships, and your interactions with other people to this frenetic kind of go, go, go pace. And once you kick into that gear, first off, we still most of the time don't get it all in. So then we feel overwhelmed, stress, anxiety, burnout, exhaustion. And even if we do, and there are some people that just have a really high emotional capacity, you know, and they can just do it. They can work insane hours and get tons of stuff done and still be happy. But even if you do, it's in like the basic case of my book is that hurry is incompatible with love. Yes. And it's no surprise to me that the Apostle Paul, in his definition of love, or his poem on love in 1 Corinthians 13, the first descriptor, and all I don't know how many there are, but the first descriptor is love is patient. And I quote that Japanese theologian who has this little book called 3 Mile an Hour God. Yes. Apparently, I had to Google it. Apparently, 3 miles an hour is the speed of walking. And he just makes the point that God is a 3 mile per hour God, because God walks, and he makes the point that God walks slowly because God is love. And if God wasn't love, he would have gone much faster. But love has its own speed. This is a quasi-verbatim quote. It is an inner speed. It is a spiritual speed. It is the speed of love. Yeah. And I think that really hit me hard. I just, you know, for any parent, this is like, really, this is an everyday experience. I don't know about you, Brooke, but all of my worst moments as a father as a husband are when I'm in a hurry. Yes. All of them.
That's exactly my experience. Yeah,
it's like absolutely. I have 3 kids and, you know, there's stuff, and my lovely wife is from a warm culture and punctuality is not her thing. So when I'm like trying to get my family somewhere on time, trying to get them all like, and you know, we have one kid whose clothes are always on backwards and inside out and nothing ever matches.
Oh man, we've got a couple of those.
He's right like now. Wearing like old sandals in the middle of February. And I'm like, every time, like, go back upstairs, change, right? What are you thinking? You know, I find myself, belittling to the children. What were you thinking? Why would you put that outfit together? Get in the car right now. Dad, can I talk to you about it? No, I don't have time right now. Get in the car. We're late. And by the time we're like pulling out, you know, it's like I'm in a fight with my wife and one of my kids is crying, you know, and we're like going to church. We will be at church on time.
Because dad has to go teach.
Because dad has to go teach on hurry and love and becoming a person of love. Because my job is to teach you how to become a person of love. Get in the car.
I know nothing of what you're talking about, John Mark.
So, I mean, there's just literally my worst moments. I mean, psychologists tell us that the primary experience of love is attention and compassionate listening. Yes. More than anything else.
Well, you wrote this quote in your book from the Microsoft researcher Linda Stone. She said, "Continuous partial attention is our new normal." Yeah, you put that in the book.
Continuous partial attention,
and I thought
also known as mom checking Instagram and dad watching ESPN while they're half talking to their children.
Yeah, so maybe just let's take a second on that, because I think that actually, you know, I the reason I bring that quote up that you found is because I feel like we live in a partial attention society, and not just in especially in our parenting, but not just in our parenting, right? And I feel like our kids are sometimes taking the biggest brunt of that, you know, because mom and dad are partially distracted. And I sensed, even when I read that, it was just another general reminder, like, wow, just by teaching our kids to focus and have a conversation and to see it through, just these little things which in the past would have been just normal are now becoming abnormal, and they're becoming real gifts to our kids. Yeah. And so if you're sitting here, you know, if you're sitting and listening to this today as a family or a husband and wife, just remember, even putting down your phone for a moment does way more.
Oh, that's huge. It's
giant. Huge. Yeah. And I know I love how you give a lot of different anecdotes in the book, which I think is great, and people definitely get into that. But yeah, the partial attention, that was a big one. Is there anything you want to add to that? I know it's obviously kind of right there, and we chatted about it, but is there anything else you want to add to that one?
Yeah, I mean, just what everybody knows, that, you know, if attention and compassionate listening are some of the main ways that we love each other well.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's great to do things for each other. It's great to pray for each other. It's all amazing stuff, but period. But when we experience somebody sitting with us, not looking at their watch in an unhurried way, fully attuned to us and attentive to us, and just listening with compassion, we feel deeply loved.
Yes.
And it's hard to do that when you have multiple kids and a job and a phone and a life, and kids are just a constant stream of interruptions. Yeah. C.S. Lewis once said something to the effect of how you respond to an interruption is who you really are. Which is just
Why did
pain
you say
to the
that?
heart
Why
as
did
a
you
dad.
Say that? Nobody needs to know that quote. That is so convicting.
I know. Well, because I mean, children are just parenting is basically just interruption management, you know? So like you, I mean, you wanted to record this podcast with me. So you texted me a couple of weeks ago, hey, can we do this? And yes, and we set a date and we set a time and you came here on time. My children don't do that. They don't like book time with me. They don't email my assistant, hey, I know John Mark's busy right now. He's got a new book out. Can I get some time on Thursday the 17th? Like they just barge into my home office, no matter how many times I tell them not to, and start talking. And sometimes it's about like really meaningful things. Like I had a really intense conversation with one of my boys today. But most of the time it's about, Dad, you know, there's a new Star Wars Lego Slave 1. I want it for Christmas. It's, you know,
really important, but that is important to an extent.
And so it's just how you manage those interruptions are the parent that you actually are.
Wow.
That, I mean, most parenting happens off schedule. There's the schedule rule of life stuff, like morning prayer and family dinners and Sabbath and church. But I don't know what percentage of parenting that is. 20%? I mean, a huge percentage, like the math is arbitrary, is interruptions and how you respond to interruptions. And I'm not saying this like I have this down. I'm a mess. Follow me around with the video camera, and I don't respond great to interruptions. But the more hurried I am, the more I have too much to do, the more I don't have margin, space, the less I have capacity in those interruptions to be present. And the other thing, the second one that's just a massive deal breaker is the phone. We have to, I just gave a teaching on kind of the danger of the phone Sunday, which was interesting.
I just listened to it, and you shared the story of you are you talking about the story from you last week?
Oh, Julie Child. Or Stiles. Yeah. I don't want to talk about that again. But
if you want to listen to it, just go to Bridgetown's podcast.
Yeah. Thank you for that exposure. It's very embarrassing.
It was really great.
But I opened with this. I couldn't give it to you because it's a long quote, but this quote from Sean Parker, who's the first president of Facebook. And the first line of the quote is, speaking of Facebook and social media in general, God only knows what it's doing to our children's brains. Yeah. And then he goes on to write about how they intentionally designed, like basically they built these platforms, Facebook being the first and now Instagram and many others. And their basic thing was how do we consume as much of your time and attention as possible? Because that's where the money, the business model, we don't pay money for Facebook or Instagram. We want to think we're the customer. We're not the customer. We're the product. So the business model is to take our attention and our time and sell it off to, big data and marketing departments and all that kind of stuff. And so the point is that the Silicon Valley kind of digital world that we live in, while there's much great that comes from it, much of it has been, if not most of it, intentionally engineered and designed for distraction and addiction. So yes, we live in a society. Distraction has always been a major human problem. The attempt to escape from the pain of reality and occupy ourselves with diversion. That's a human problem, not a late modern problem. But it's never been easier before than with a phone. And so as a parent, I think you have to have a rigorous, almost asceticism kind of approach to your phone and television and technology. Albert Borgman, writing before the digital age, in the 90s, who was a professor and media critic, said the most important decision that you will ever make is whether or not you have a TV. And the second most important decision you will ever make is which room in your house you put it in.
I've heard that before. And remind me, what year was that?
I would have to go get a quote from that. I would guess late 90s. Don't quote me on that.
Yeah, but it's
before digital age.
That's what I'm saying. It's before 2007.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he has some great work. He has a book called Living Into Focus. That's a beautiful read, and just talking about how homes used to be designed around the table and the hearth.
Yes.
And now they're designed around the flat screen TV and how that's just destroyed family. And that's quaint now, because now it's not even around the TV. Now it's just devices. Each kid has a device in their own room.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is just insane to me, to give internet access to children. I mean, we would never give them like a handgun Or, it's illegal to drive a car. It's illegal to, but yet we'll put the internet in the hands of a boy. And it's
so
just like
dangerous. Yeah.
So dangerous. So all that to say, I'm a little harbinger of doom, but I think this matters a lot.
No, it absolutely matters.
And, so I read an example of a rule of life in that teaching, not my own, just from a family in our church, just a random guy in our church. He said, "Oh, here's my rule of life." And it was really cool that he'd done it before we even taught on it. And one of his things was the same thing. It was like no phone at the dinner table. And it was it's a couple of his rules. Like one was no phone at the dinner table. Another was keep phone away from arm's reach. So whenever possible, have it in another room or in a closet or in a box. So it's not like there to tempt you. And another one was when at children's sports games or choir practice or something like that, don't have your phone with you. Like don't be looking. And the point was mom and kids should grow up seeing mom and dad, not seeing them on their phone all the time, and not thinking that digital distraction and addiction is totally okay because mom's always like half talking to me and half posting on Instagram, or dad's always half talking to me and half
and if you're listening, to this and you're a mom, there's grace. If you're
a dad, tons of grace, but get rid of your phone, or get a digital rule of life.
Digital rule of life.
And I mean, the crazy thing about distraction is, ultimately, the reason it's a form of addiction is not just because of Silicon Valley and neurobiology and dopamine, though that's a thing. It's because all addiction is an attempt to escape from the pain of reality.
Yes.
And what could be more painful than parenting? Nobody says that because there's so much unhealthy romanticism around parenting, even in the church, sadly. So idealistic, which is just toxic because it makes people just feel shame. But, my therapist said to me recently, off the record, so I won't say his name, but he said, the two most painful things that will ever happen to you, the two most difficult and painful things you will ever do are be a parent and a spouse. And he wasn't saying it in like a cynical way at all.
No, he's saying it in a factual, real way.
But he was saying nobody says that. Nobody stands up on the wedding day and says, "Oh, it's so sweet, but this is going to be like nobody's going to break your heart, frustrate you, annoy you, bring out your sin, the worst part of who you are, expose all of your insecurity, like this person's relationship." And nobody says to like a young parent at the hospital, "Oh, congratulations, this is going to be the furnace of your affliction. This is going to bring you more anxiety than you ever thought possible, more heartache, more pain, more joy, it costs more money, more." We're just like, "Oh, you're so happy." And then what happens is people then go into marriage and parenting for narcissistic reasons, not for agape, but because they want to feel good.
Absolutely.
And then they don't feel good. And marriage, there's an easier out, divorce, hence the widespread divorce in our culture. Parenting, it's a lot harder to get out of. And so a lot of parents just check out. You can't divorce your kids. Some find some equivalent of that as their kids get older. But we can ignore our kids. We can block our kids. We can distract ourselves from the pain of little Johnny's not impressed with us and is crying again through Instagram or TV or whatever the thing is, And so I think the gracious invitation, that's not to slam anybody. This is me too. I think the gracious invitation there is not toward cynicism. It's toward, finding ways to face the pain of reality in the loving, under the loving eye of God and in loving, compassionate Christian community, so that you can actually face that pain, move through that pain, and learn to get free of distraction and be present and unhurried in love to your children to whatever degree that we can, and knowing that all of us will mess this up every single day. and so it's just moving in that direction.
Yeah, and if you're listening, I think pause, rewind about 10 minutes and listen to this whole thing again. that part again specifically, because there's so much truth. I'm even, as you're saying that, it's brilliant. I think that's spirit-filled. I even think there's some prophetic elements to that, because I sense that a lot of people that are going to hear that, honestly, are going to in some way feel, and I hope I think it will bring hope, is feel validated, like I'm not crazy.
No.
Right? And like that it's not wrong. It's not wrong that my marriage is really challenging.
Or that some of this feels like a disappointment.
Yes. And that we're disappointed about maybe how things went. I know.
Especially as your kids get older.
Yeah.
When they're littler, you can kind of still believe the myth and the idealism that they will become what you want them to become.
Yeah.
As they age and you realize they have free will, you begin to realize, oh wow, this is not clay in my hands to mold as I see fit.
Yeah,
and my attempts to control them will actually push them away from me and hurt them at times, and often sabotage their own growth. And they're going to make mistakes, and they're going to do things I disagree with. I have wonderful kids. It's not like I'm not speaking out of some like wound, but but they're also, I don't know what's going to happen. But it's scarier. The older they get, the more you have to face reality. That this child isn't a blank canvas for me to architect a life onto.
Yeah.
This is a soul created by God, not by me. And each one of my kids inherited generations of sin and literally in their genetic code, if that's to be believed. And I think it is, and I sin against them and I've hurt them. And this is all messy and beautiful and redemptive and wonderful. But you have to let go of the illusion of romanticism, of idealism, control. That is the hallmark Christian conference book like that just drives people into hiding, shame, and guilt.
Even what we're trying to do with intentional parenting, I think the main thing we try to do is try to really paint a realistic picture that none of us have this figured out. If anything, it's really messy. I think the disappointment thing we did an episode, I think it was season 2, episode 2. We talked about Birdie's, the disappointment with Birdie of just like this 6-month-old child was completely fine, normal, and healthy, and then all of a sudden she is not. And who she is beautiful and wonderful, and we wouldn't trade it, absolutely. And at the same time, the day-to-day realism of what that disease did to her mind and her physical body, and now the rest of her life, is really disappointing. It's really disappointing. And to actually...
And to fake it, or to lie about that, or for me to give you some platitude, like
it doesn't work. It doesn't. And I think that's been really a gift, and you've been very helpful in that, even in offline conversations of just, you've always checked in and always been really caring in that space and helpful in that space, which has been huge. And to kind of a couple things we have to cover before we end this podcast, because they're really great.
Yeah, great. Now that everybody hates me because I'm like telling them to
truth,
go to war with the
truth
phone.
And love, man. This is truth, and it's beautiful. So I appreciate the wisdom.
I'm the truth, you're the love, right? Bad cop, good cop.
Yeah, we'll keep going at it. I think for hurry, you talk about hurry sickness, and we don't need to go into this right now, but I think when you gave the 10 symptoms for hurry sickness, hey, if you don't think you're hurry sick, read these 10 things. And if you can relate with any of them, maybe you are hurry sick. I read like all of them, and I started making a check mark after every one. And by the 5th one that I checked, I was like, I'm done. I can't do this. I can't. Like the 7 in me was like, this is too much pain. I can't look at it.
Guilt trip, mission accomplished.
Yeah, mission accomplished. But to get the book just for that was so helpful. And I think just to highlight, if you put 10 symptoms, and you went into detail, but just a few are like irritability, hypersensitivity, restlessness, escape behaviors. This is just to name a few, right? That's just like a couple. All of those I can be like, what are you talking about? But you also highlighted hurry as like hurry being kind of like a bad guy, to speak as a parent. And there's this phrase in page 33 that really stuck out to me. Hurry is a psychopathic predator loose in our society. I think you said that phrase, and that actually helped me, and maybe it will help some, and maybe it won't for some that are listening, but I really think that was helpful for me to realize we're not just dealing with this isn't like hurry is just kind of an optional.
No, this is major.
This is actually a big deal, and we should actually not write it off and go, no, hurry is actually going to be fine, and it will take care of itself. It will go away if we just kind of ignore it. That language I thought was not only poetic and helpful, but also really good to help me go, this is serious. Which I wanted to just kind of highlight for those listening, like, please, that's a really big deal. But where I kind of want to land.
And I think what that means is similar to digital distraction, and really which I would view as just like a subcategory of hurry. To go against it is literally to go against the entire inertia of Western civilization, of capitalism right now, of politics, of materialism, of the social pressure, of social media culture, of materialism, like to live an anti-hurry life, or a life that isn't digital distraction and addiction is normal, is literally, it's the epitome of to swim upstream. So you have to find very ruthless and intentional counter habits of resistance to slow your life down, to be present to the moment and inhabit each moment as much as you can. It doesn't just happen because we're inspired.
Yeah.
Or we hear a podcast and like, that's an aspirational idea. Let me slow down. You have to actually like, it's got to get into your rule of life. It's got to get into your muscle memory. You have to like have counter habits.
Change your life.
Yeah, because you're in a river, and the river is going 100 miles per hour toward hurry, digital distraction, noise, shopping, overload, too many activities. Have your kids in every single thing. Do all the things. Go, 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 go. And so if you're going to live differently, you can't be aspirational. It has to like actually make it into your schedule, your budget, your weekend routine, your muscle memory.
Mm-hmm. I think you've done such a great job of leading by example. You've really reorganized your life. And I know for me, like you said, your worst moments are when you're hurried with your kids, right? Yeah. But I also think that I know for me personally, I also don't enjoy my kids when I'm hurried
at all.
And when I find that I can, wrestle my hurry and the different things in my life to a point where I can just sit and enjoy, I enjoy them so much more. And marriage, family, all of it. I enjoy life much more, but especially the arena of kids. You start to appreciate that world. And you said, love is attention. You said that. I read that little part yesterday in the morning, and last night I went on a daddy-daughter date with Scarlett. And I just had that going through my mind, like, I'm just going to try to give her eye contact the whole time.
Yep.
And it was amazing to see, compared to other times, how just not being distracted by not just my phone, but by anything, trying to just do my best to give attention, recognizing that had so much power that I hadn't. So it was a fun little, actually I read it and I was like, this is a great little moment to practice that and to see almost immediate fruit.
Yeah.
So thank you for that, because that was really helpful.
In my Bible right here, I have like a little prayer card that is my daily prayers. And then I have a different one for each day of the week. But there's one card that's like about 10 things that I pray for every single day. And the second thing on that list is that God would give me grace to delight in my wife and my children. Because that doesn't come easily to me. And I have a wonderful wife and wonderful children, but maybe I'm not that personality, or I don't know. I can default more toward criticism or perfectionism or, annoyance. And it's the same thing. Like when I'm tired and hurried and over busy, my capacity to delight is like at 10% at best.
Yes.
And when I'm well rested and not in a hurry and I don't have too much to do and I have a little margin, I find myself naturally delighting in them and loving them. It's just the natural byproduct of the Spirit of God.
That is so encouraging.
And so what I've realized is, oh wow, sometimes I overemphasize even the spiritual disciplines, which is almost impossible to do. But I can get up at 5 a.m. and pray and fast and read the Bible and memorize scripture and read a book on parenting and come out 3 hours later and literally 10 seconds later be yelling at Moses because he spilled almond milk again on the floor, or his shirt's on backwards and the bus is waiting for him, and
no one can relate with you.
Or I can just like take the night off and go to bed early and rest and do some things that are life-giving for my soul, and wake up in the morning and read a psalm and pray and focus on God. And it's just, it's generally pretty easy to love and forgive and relax and go with the flow when he spills the almond milk. So the emotionally exhausted, stressed, hurried people do not love well. Yeah. And the more rested that we are,
that's so good.
The more unhurried we are, the more relaxed we are, the more joyful we are. As a general rule, the more loving we are, which is why I think joy plays such a central role in the New Testament and in Jesus' teachings. Think about Gospel of John. Just go do a word study on joy in the Gospel of John. And Jesus, his teachings on joy are phenomenal. He wants that your joy would overflow. Think of those moments where you have so much joy that literally you can't contain it. You have to yell, or you have to dance, or you have to clap, or you have to scream.
I'm trying to remember a time when that happened.
Because you're just so happy. Jesus wants you to, in a sense, like that to be your default setting. Just, not necessarily in the emotional high sense, but just this joy overflow, that my joy would be in them, Jesus was a joyful person. And I think it's more than he just wants us to feel happiness and pleasure. I think it's because he recognizes love as the telos of the spiritual journey. And joyful people find it much easier to love. Depressed people, hurting people, wounded people end up caught in their own pain. And that's not a slam on anybody. We're all in there at times. On days when I'm just down and mad or depressed, or if somebody hurt my feelings, I am not a very loving parent because I'm in my own little self-love world, dealing with my pain. And the more joyful I am and rested I am, the more loving I am as a parent, which is why some of the most important things I think you can do as a parent are self-care, sleep, Sabbath, rest,
yes.
not family-centered parenting, in my opinion, not letting your kids run everything, but really prioritizing emotional and holistic body, even health, whether that be going for a run or doing what you need to do, so that you can be a loving parent.
And that's a perfect place where I would love to just kind of land today. Two things. You mentioned something right before we started, which I'd love for you to mention if you have a second, right before we started the podcast. But the thing that you just said, Elizabeth sent me a question. So it's kind of like she's interviewing you as well. But she sent me a question. Say? Yeah, I know. And she's by far the better one.
Your better half.
By far. But she just asked this. She just said this in a little bit of a question. She said, your chapter on Sabbath was so inspiring to me. I know it's needed. I wonder if there are a lot of parents like us out there that in stages of multiple toddlers and Sabbath is kind of hard.
Yeah.
Not impossible, but it can sometimes feel defeating, she says, because it's hard to rest in our current stage. 2-year-olds, she said, don't get the memo that it's a day of rest. Any tips for parents of young children? Where should they start?
Oh yeah, that's great. First off, I mean, just a nod my head, and yes, it is hard when you have little kids.
Yep.
I think the two hardest stages for Sabbath, other than if you're interning at a law firm for 110 hours a week or your medical residency or but as far as for most people, most families, I think the two hardest stages are really little kids, and then maybe teenagers. Little kids because they're just exhausting and you have to chase them around the house because they break everything.
Yeah. And
teenagers because they're active. Like a teenager wants to go out, be with friends. A teenager craves stimuli, craves getting out of the house, not staying in, most as a general rule. And they have lots of activities, and our culture is very busy. So those are two, I think, difficult stages to manage. And so there's solidarity there, yet it's a tragedy when parents just say, well, we can't really Sabbath right now. We have a 2-year-old or we have a 17-year-old or whatever. And those are two of likely the most important seasons of your entire life to Sabbath. So it's the ironic thing. You need Sabbath most when it's most difficult.
Yeah.
And the tricky thing about Sabbath is Sabbath will come for you whether it's discipline or delight. So if you don't Sabbath, it will come for you. You'll get, whether it comes for you as illness or a flu that won't go away or a relational breakdown or emotional crash or a TV addiction, Sabbath will come to you. Something will come to you that will force you into bed, force you to rest, force you to sleep, often in the form of illness, So, as far as just practical stuff, what, Tammy and I did when the kids were little is we just divided the day into thirds. So we would do a third of it together as a family, doing, going to get donuts or walking to the park or, playing on the floor and wrestling. A third of it, T would take the kids while I would go off and be alone and do what I want to do, which for me is reading and journaling and thinking. And a third of it, I would take the kids and she would do what she wanted to do, which was usually take a nap and then go have tea with her best friend. And so we just kind of use that model of a thirds. Is that ideal? No. Is it better to be like an empty nester and have 24 hours where you just turn everything off and just do exactly what you want? It's wonderful, and open a bottle of wine with your spouse at the end of the day after reading poetry. Yeah, that sounds a lot more restful. But that's not your stage of life you're in, And so I still think that just doing some of the basics, like a digital Sabbath, turning all devices off for a full 24 hours can be life-giving for the family. And little kids love it. It might not be as fun for mom and dad. Our kids actually enjoyed Sabbath, I think, more in that little stage than ever.
Yes.
I remember when Moses and Jude were young. So this would have been at, say, it was our Rummer house. They would have been, I don't know. Jude would have been 3, when Moses was 2 to 5, and Jude was 5 to 8. Those little kid ages where they can't keep track of time. They love Sabbath so much that every morning Moses would ask, is it Sabbath today, Daddy? You're like, no, it's Wednesday. It was Sabbath. Is it Sabbath today? Yet. No, it was yesterday, Moses, But he just so looked forward to it because that was the day we were together. We did special foods. Another thing we did when the kids were really little is we had a special Sabbath box of toys that was just for the Sabbath. Because you know how kids are, when they're at that little stage, 1.5 to 3, you give them a new toy and you just bought 45 minutes on the couch.
You bought a ton of time.
It's a precious 45 minutes,
Yes.
And so we had a box of toys that was literally they could only, and this is a privilege thing, I totally get that, but they could only play with on the Sabbath. And so we'd put it away and we'd bring it out and they'd be, you know, that stage where like they play with toys all over the living room.
Absolutely.
And they just cover the ground and you can't walk, that stage. And they would just be like, oh, yay. And then, boom, we'd have them. And then Tammy and I could sit and have a conversation or whatever. And we have special foods that we eat, and they get to eat sugar and have dessert. And we just did fun things like that, you know? And we also have been big adherents of, like, don't let your kids run you. And so from pretty early on, our kids had a wake-up time. They couldn't get up whenever they wanted. Yeah. And the first letter or number that my kids learned was 7, because we put an alarm clock next to their room, taught them the number 7, and said, you're not allowed out of bed until there's a 7 and the first number. You know? No, dude, that's
we
just said, this is your bed, here's a pile of books.
I think you gave that to us a long time ago, and I think it's been, maybe 6 years now. And that has been the biggest gift, and the light now.
Oh, so many parents are judging us right now.
Oh no, but I have to tell you, man, that to give your kids that order, I don't even think they're judging. I think it's wisdom, like giving your kids a sense of order. Our kids thrive off of it. Oh yeah, personally, even Birdie,
kids are happy. They're easy.
We have a clock that turns green when you can get up, like she can't see the number, cool. She can't read the number, but she knows colors.
Yeah,
and so she knows, like, if it's yellow, you
are
means
in.
Caution.
And if there's an emergency, of course,
yeah,
and that would give us time to get the sleep we need if we went to bed on time, and then to get up and spend some time in prayer and a little bit of time in the scripture, so we could actually greet our kids from a place
of joy,
of centering and grounding and joy and love, rather than like wake up to our kids crying and go in annoyed at them, and their first expression is like, you know, exhausted dad with bedhead just being like, why did you wake up? You know? So I don't want that, you know, and that happens. Some of that's unavoidable. So yeah, I think that's huge. And then I think just going really easy on yourself, just being really gracious and patient with yourself. And the only thing I would say is, I think the need for multi-generational family and community is massive. So this is a whole other podcast series, but I don't personally think that the human species, if you want to say evolved or was designed by God to have, you know, single, you know, nuclear families in suburban homes where one parent stays home with 4 kids or whatever all day long, is locked away, and then on the Sabbath it's just 2 parents trying to care for all the kids. Now, of course, the human being is a very adaptable creature before God. And so you can do it that way, and we've done much of it that way. But I think we're designed for communal life, for village life, for multi-generational expressions of family. I think how most humans live around the world and have lived for all of human history is Sabbath would come around and, you know, grandma was upstairs, and you know, other grandma was across the
there was a date opportunity
and
potentially.
Uncle lived next door, and there were 20 other kids running around, but Brooke and Elizabeth were there too, and you know, and the older kids often help take care of the younger kids, and you know, it's the weird dynamic where you see these families of like 7 or 8 kids, and they actually look less stressed out than the families with 3 kids. And I can't, so you're just right in the middle. You have the worst of both worlds. You have 4. But it's just the bizarrest thing. There's some kind of, and psychologists have done work on it. It's really fascinating. Like there's an odd dynamic. Yeah. Because what happens is the older kids take on more the role of a parent. And it's just bizarre.
So you're telling people that are listening, go have more kids.
7 kids.
Yeah, if you have 4, go up to 7. We met a family recently that has 11 kids. 11 kids, and they drive a Sprinter van, and they're rad.
They're just doing it,
and they all seemed really happy and rested. I was like, there has got to be something going on.
There's a different psychological dynamic that happens in larger families. So that's another thing. You should interview an expert on that at some point. But my point is, for those that do live in a suburban home with mom and dad and 3 kids, is that I do think that what you're feeling in that moment is maybe that we're not living exactly the way that we're best designed to flourish. And so, as impractical as it might sound, I would just say, what are ways that you could cultivate multi-generational housing, family structures, communal life? Could you move into the same apartment complex with 3 other families? Could you get your parents to move in next to you? Could you? I mean, Tammy and I are already dreaming about, when, you know, our kids are gone, selling this house and buying some kind of a house that is a duplex or has a condo, and living with one of our kids in a separate house. You're not like, you know, in an unhealthy way. We're still Americans.
We still have privacy.
We still want boundaries. I still want my clean house and don't want some 2-year-old grandkid messing up my stuff. But
I can't wait till we get to intentional grandparenting. I'm going to have you speak on that specifically. John Mark, tell us about your 2-year-old.
That. So my point is, I think that's a great travesty that the American culture has lost, and the American church too. Is we don't have a high enough value like our European friends do, like pretty much all of the global South does, for multi-generational, communal-based parenting.
Yes.
And we really feel that on the Sabbath when it's just like, mom and dad are exhausted from the work week and there's 2 kids running around and the TV's on and you're like, is this really the best way to flourish? So I think whatever that looks like, I still think even with little kids, you have to crush idealism because it'll just make you feel like a failure when you might be doing a beautiful job.
Yeah.
And you have to, and just get some practical things. If that's divide the day into thirds, if that's a Sabbath box, if that's, getting grandparents involved, and then just move toward and turn off your phone and just move toward what are ways that we could bring other community in, generations in, parents in, all that kind of stuff.
I love that. And I think that's a perfect place to land. And the Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, what I also love that we didn't go into, which is worth the book, and it is all of how you talk about the spiritual disciplines living into the cure for hurry. And so obviously we didn't get into that because I'd rather you just go buy the book or download it. Is the audiobook out yet?
Audiobook's out. Well, I don't know when this podcast comes out.
Yeah.
From date of recording, I think the audiobook's out in 2 weeks or something.
Okay,
like
so
that.
close. Yeah, we'll be close. Maybe a week off or so. So, but whether that's a
audiobook for young parents.
That's why I'm asking, because it's easier to listen to a book than it is to read.
Young moms and dads, audiobook is the way to go.
Yes.
I read it myself.
I was going to ask,
for better or for worse. I just spent 2 very long days in the studio reading my own book. It was very embarrassing.
Thank you for your time, your wisdom. I think it is good to know. I think it is good for people to know that you are an incredible dad. I've been watching you for 14 years now. And what's so cool is, for me personally, kind of being on this side of it, you're a very different dad than your dad, but no less intentional. And so I think what's been really cool that I've been able to see is I've been able to gain the wisdom and the discernment from your dad, Phil, and then also seeing how you're applying a lot of that in the current time that we live in, because we're just in a totally different time than when you were
deal with the iPhone and Netflix.
It was a lot. I mean, I don't want to say his job was easier, but I mean, in the sense, those dynamics are very unique to our culture and time, and they're really challenging, and they're not like this easy fix all, like just don't give your kid a phone. That doesn't always just work. Now, to a certain age, it does. But without getting on another topic, the Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, John Mark Comer, my brother, my friend, I love you. Thank you for spending this time, and really appreciate it.
And for all of you out there, just the work you do as a parent is the most important thing you'll really ever do. And there's really no, just let me end with this. There's hardly anything, if anything, that is more conducive to becoming a person of love if you let it. All those interruptions that make up parenting, the exhaustion, the lack of sleep, the lack of, I really can think marriage does an incredible job, but parenting even more. If one way to frame the spiritual journey is moving off of the egoic operating system, where everything's just about what I want, what I need, what makes me feel good, regardless of what it does to other people, and moving off the egoic operating system to agape, to a life where you live literally for the good of other people in love. There are lots of things that can help you make that journey, from spiritual disciplines to marriage to church. But really, I can't think of anything better than parenting. It will give you a daily opportunity to step off of the egoic operating system, to recognize your time is not your own, your body's not your own, even if you're nursing right now or whatever, your money's not your own, your future's not your own, your decisions are not your own. It will just help set you free from these things that we think we have control over, and in reality, they control us. And so, man, every interruption, every child is the hardest thing you will ever do. And people won't tell you that because they want to romanticize it. I think it's the most difficult thing I've ever done. Nothing has exposed my immaturity, my narcissism, my anger, my, selfishness, my fear than like parenting has.
Yes.
And marriage is a close second, but it's still a ways back. And what an incredible opportunity from God to slowly, over decades, become people of love. And what else matters? When we're 85, 90, 95, what will really matter is, have we become joyful, unhurried, relaxed, grateful people who don't need to control other people and events to be happy, because we're just happy and at peace. And every day that we parent is an opportunity to slowly move in that direction and become those kinds of people.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. If this podcast has blessed you in any way, here's a few ways that you can partner with us in this ministry. First is to give. Intentional Parents is a nonprofit, and we rely on the generous giving of our partners. So please head over to our website, intentionalparents.org/give, if you would like to become one of our partners through giving. Second is to share it. If this has at all been helpful to you, we encourage you to share it with your friends, your family, and those that you know would be blessed by it. Third is to follow us on social media platforms, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. You can find us on Instagram at intentional_parents. And lastly, if you would head over to iTunes if you enjoyed today's episode and leave a review on iTunes, this helps us bring more hope, help, and healing for families.